Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in person. We do have some folks in person here in the audience. Thank you for joining us on this rainy Wednesday afternoon. And again, also thank you to those of you joining us virtually. I'm Roger Ward, Provost and Executive Vice President here at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. And it is my great pleasure to introduce this session. We have, I would say, going back 10 years now, have been administering both for faculty, staff, and students experience surveys, because going back on our second strategic plan, one of the goals we set for ourselves as an institution is to make sure that UMB is seen as an outstanding place to work. And as a part of that planning process, we had conversations with faculty, staff, and students who said we really need to get our finger on the pulse of how faculty, staff, and students experience the university. So we started on a biannual basis and have been doing that since then, conducting these experience surveys. On this particular occasion, I think we used to do it at one point, have both faculty and staff combined, and we've broken that out now into a faculty experience survey, a staff experience survey, student experience survey, and so on, because we are truly committed to making sure that this is an outstanding place to work. Faculty are the keepers of the mission. In my book, and certainly in my role as the provost, the faculty is responsible for educating our students, educating the next generation of leaders and scientists, and again, leaders in their respective disciplines. So it is important to us that we hear from our faculty and we understand completely how the faculty experiences the university. So it gives me great pleasure to preview the results from our most recent administration of the Faculty Experience Survey. It's a lot of data, but it's a lot of very good data. So I will now turn the podium over to our Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, Dr. Diane Forbes-Berthoud, to talk a little bit more about the process, the results, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. Again, thank you for your time and engagement.
Thank you, Dr. Ward, and thank you for joining us. So as Dr. Ward mentioned, I'm Diane Forbes-Berthoud, Vice President for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. I am one of the partner leaders helping to bring this process to our campus. We have a new provider that helps us both in thinking about separating and disaggregating populations by work experience or population as in faculty, staff, students, et cetera, and also by demographic groups, gender, racial, ethnicity, racial, ethnic, disability groups, and sexual orientation. And my role here is to set this up for us, provide a general overview. Dr. Sestone, who is AVP for Faculty Affairs, will go into the general data, and then I'll take some time a little bit later to talk about specific experiences across racial, gender groups, and disability and sexual orientation groups. So I'll provide the background. We'll go through the reports. Thanks to Dr. Dawn Rhodes and others who worked very much on core values and integrating those into our work. Core values have been integrated more in all of our surveys now, our staff, faculty, and our student surveys. So there are at least 1 or 2 questions about core values. In order to answer questions about some of the surveys from about 2015 or so, people asked, well, what about the surveys we did at this point? Is there any comparison? Do we know if we're doing better, performing better in those ways? So we'll also have at least 15 to 20 items where we'll compare those. I will introduce to some folks and reintroduce to others a net promoter score, which we have for the staff experience survey. So we understand drivers of satisfaction and what makes people feel good about working here or researching here as faculty. And then there's specific conduct and behavioral items, and we'll discuss next steps, because it's not, this exercise isn't only here's what the results are, but it is also what will we do with these results as it relates to strategic planning, implementation, and accountability. So for those of you who know anything about organizational behavior and life, a number of times, a lot of the focus is on satisfaction, which is what we call the employee contract. So the hygiene factors like training, safety, pay, those kinds of things are what most surveys look at and are focused on. The importance of this survey is thinking about satisfaction in relationship to engagement. So things like, how do people feel about work? What is their level of commitment? How passionate are they? How committed they are to themselves, their work, in this case, their research, scholarship, or teaching, and the ways in which we bring our whole selves to work. So there are aspects of this survey that deals with, I'm a satisfied member of UMB or faculty member of UMB or a valued member. And there are other elements about, I enjoy working with my colleagues, or I feel respected by my peers or by my students. So there are elements here that this survey offers that we're really excited about. Generally, these are some general findings, not about this survey in particular, but about human beings. So in lots of studies, we learned that, like the second bullet point, for example, 92% of employees say that showing empathy is an important way to advance employee retention. So that how we can translate that to our life here is some of our core values and the things we talk about in terms of a culture of care, or showing up for people, or creating space for people to share their thoughts and their feelings. 76% of employees who do not feel valued are looking for other job opportunities. So we know if people don't feel valued, there are issues related to retention. At the bottom here, about 2/3 of the employees say that processes for advancement are not clearly defined, and they're looking for new jobs. So we see areas that impact retention based on conditions of work, but there are also things about happiness and strengths and creativity. When those things are encouraged, people want to stay somewhere. They want to contribute to what is happening here. So these things are really important, that when employees feel that their voice is heard, they work almost 5 times, they're 5 times more likely to perform better at their jobs. So things that you share or that you've stated in future of work, or for sustainability or related to equity, if those things are integrated into what we do, you're more likely to be happy here and make a contribution and stay. So that will impact retention. The faculty experience survey that we've offered here on campus, and also the staff experience survey that we shared with you last year, some unique characteristics is that it's not only anonymous, but it's confidential. We're not able to trace any responses to any individual person, faculty ID, work ID, anything of the sort. So there's no way for us to know what the individual responses are that you've shared. So thank you for participating. And Dr. Sestone will go through the specific response rates. There are specific equity inclusion items. There are also actionable items, and I'll introduce this measure called the Employee Net Promoter Score. There are also actionable reports. In previous surveys, we certainly could massage those a little bit more. There are questions such as, I have a best friend at work. Well, whatever data we get from that is useful to know, but then what do we do with that? What if we got something that we do have best friends at work, or we don't, what's the action that we're asking of ourselves? However, if there's an item that says something about employee evaluations not being perceived as fair, or people are not sure how their research advances what happens in the department, or they don't feel respected by their students or by their faculty peers, there's actually something we can do with that related to development activities, related to refining the professional development or the promotion and tenure assessments and so forth. So all the items here have something that we can do something with, which is really important. And it's benchmarkable. Some people find this useful, some don't. How other universities are doing in that particular area in core values. People say, well, I don't really need to know that, because Penn is a different type of university from ours, or Pitt, or Buffalo, or UNC, although there are some characteristics that are similar. So I think now we will be going into the data, and here's Dr. Christina Sestone, AVP for Faculty Affairs.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes-Berthoud. It's my pleasure to present a lot of data to you today. So we'll pause. Do we have a chat, Alex, for questions that? No one's there yet. Okay. So we'll go right through into this. So overall, it's important to keep in mind that this survey was done about a year ago to the month. And the invites went out to 3,240 colleagues, and we received a 37% response rate, which in social science is a very strong response rate to survey data. Our overall satisfaction, those who reported being satisfied or extremely satisfied with being at UMB, was 72%. Thank you. So you're not expected to be able to read the documents on the bottom, but the titles of each of these will be what we're getting into in terms of the data. So there's a lot of data here, including descriptive statistics, those who participated, means and trends on the measurement instrument, visual representation of the data, and comparison to the earlier surveys that Dr. Ward and Forbes-Berthoud mentioned. So we'll walk through and briefly highlight what is on the slides. And while we do so, please reflect on what the data might be saying. And then full reports were and will be provided to schools. We are having one-on-one presentations with each of the deans and their key members. So slide 8 is highlighting here in yellow each of the reports that are about to come. And again, this was an anonymous survey, so where there are fewer than 5 respondents in an area, data would not be reported, and that's most salient when Dr. Forbes-Berthoud gets to the EDI data. So for UMB all, we have a grid here that shows the dimension means, and the dimension means are satisfaction with UMB, department culture and values, department or unit effectiveness, academic welfare, and DEI. And each of these dimensions included approximately, I would say, 9 to 15 items. And that's what this overall mean is capturing. It is capturing the response set for each of the items within the dimension. So for example, when we look at the satisfactions with UMB scale, this included items regarding leadership decision-making and overall satisfaction, perhaps with work environment. The value and culture item included items such as, I understand how my work contributes to my school's mission, or colleagues in my school value my contribution. Departmental effectiveness, and as we get later into the presentation, we'll actually have a grid that shows each topical item. So if you have questions as we're going through the results, you'll see that grid at the end that may answer some of those questions. So what the retention item says, I can see myself working in the same school within 1 to 2 years' time. And for this item, it's strong because we see that there are 77% of respondents saying that they see themselves, they strongly or agree that they can see themselves working in the same school in that time period. Strong scores in values and culture, academic welfare, and DEI, all denoted by the blue bars. And then the pink bars note a marginal score mean for that dimension. This slide indicates all schools you'll see here on the left, and then the dimensions going across the top. And if you can just kind of look at it as a color-coded heat map, all the blue is good and all the pink is marginal. And then if you look across at your school, you can see particular scores across each of the dimensions. So for DEI, the reason it's highlighted with a red box is because it is representing the highest scores across all the dimensions for UMB. And also the satisfaction scores for value and culture and academic welfare fall into the good range. So they have a lot of blue means across the items. 2 units, academic affairs and the School of Nursing, show the highest scores across the satisfaction dimension. This slide examines the results of a single item, which is overall, I am a satisfied faculty member of UMB. And you can see the overall mean, grand mean is at the bottom of 3.78, which is in the good range. And then over again on the left, you can see by school compared to UMB, where your school fell in terms of this item. Again, academic affairs, School of Dentistry and School of Nursing scored 4.0 or higher on the I am a satisfied faculty member at UMB. Okay, so as we get into slide 12, this was my school practices UMB's core values. So a very specific item. Again, grand mean across the bottom, 3.87. The response is in the good range, and satisfaction score is high across all schools for this item. The Office of Academic Affairs, again, stands out from the rest with a high score of 4.14, getting in good and approaching that excellent range. So hopefully this chart is conveying well online for our virtual viewers. But what we have here is on the left, we have the satisfaction dimensions, again, department effectiveness, academic welfare, and DEI excerpted here. And then this is where you see the topical items in the middle of the table. So practices core values, adequate staffing, equitable teaching loads, and so forth. And then there are scores on the right side with blue arrows pointing to specific items. So for the top 2 arrows that you see pointing here, one is for total compensation, and it's in the marginal range, 3.28, supports work-life balance, 3.22, also in the marginal range, along with its buddy that's right above it at 3.34 for reasonable workload. And then those would be considered not as strong. And then student respect in academic welfare is 4.18, so a good score there. The satisfaction score of student respect, we've had questions on this as we've gone to the schools, and it has a positive contribution to the overall satisfaction score of academic welfare, but low in terms of total compensation. But the scores for total compensation and supports work-life balance are both in the marginal range. So they lower that overall mean for academic welfare to 3.71. Let's see, is there anything important else to note on this slide? I think, whoops. As we go back, it's important to note you'll see an item in red at the top. I mentioned earlier adequate staffing, which is the lowest at 2.77. And so that's below marginal. That's considered a low score. And there was some trends there across schools in this area. So as we move on to the items for DEI, for diversity, equity, inclusion dimension, you'll see across the top, we get a little more granular here with what items constituted this dimension. So are all cultures treated fairly? Are we committed to EDI as an institution? Do we have diverse faculty? Do we respect gender identities and are we inclusive of people with disabilities, and so forth? And you can see the box in red which is sexual orientation is treated fairly, is among the highest scores across schools, and for UMB overall with a mean score of 4.10. I'm just not going to touch anything, keeps advancing. Okay. So the items that are in green show, again, the highest scores for diverse faculty under School of Law, committed to EDI, a high score in School of Nursing of 4.20, and there's only one marginal score of 3.0 in the Office of Academic Affairs for inclusivity of people with disabilities. We're not sure what that represents. So on this slide, what we portray is the top and the bottom of the scoring. So for the items in the core survey, so when I say core survey, I mean items 2 through 57, because there were other interpersonal questions and demographic questions that were on the survey. So for the dimension-based questions, the top satisfaction scores are enjoy working with colleagues, feeling a sense of their student respect, the school's mission, sexual orientation being treated fairly, and that there's sufficient mentoring guidance. So those were strong areas. The lowest scores are in adequate staffing, feeling as if one has a voice, work-life balance resources, equitable resources, and then transparency around decision-making. So this is also a very busy slide, but this is the slide that shows the cross comparison between the Gallup surveys. And I'm just really gonna talk about the 2019 Gallup survey and then the current Faculty Experience Survey of a year ago. And they were not one for one in terms of the items that they measured. And so what this table represents are the topics that we try to show parity, that there were topical areas that were common across both surveys. And here are the scores related to those topical areas. So the green, such as the FES over here on the right column, shows an improved score over the Gallup on a particular area, such as being a valued member of the team. 3.58 versus the Gallup, which was 3.18 in 2019. Enjoy working with colleagues. If you go over to the FES, it's 4.34. In 2019, it was 3.18. So some increases, hard to make statistical correlations between these areas because the survey items were slightly different. But when we look at trends, it's positive to be going in this direction. And the green just simply, again, means that the mean of the FES score is greater than the Gallup score of 2019. Slide 17 is just a visual representation of the data that was on the prior slide. So the orange bars represent the Gallup survey, and the gray represent the FES scores from 2023. The arrows point to the direction of the data going increasing, and that is being a positive trend. So that is for all cultures being treated fairly, for example, and enjoying working with colleagues. Those both went up as I presented. And then, unfortunately, having a feeling like you have a voice went down. So this is just a graphical representation of the prior scores on the prior slide. And now I'll turn it back to Dr. Forbes-Berthoud, who will go through the Net Promoter Score and take us into some of the specific EDI data. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Hi again, folks. All right, so this is a measure that was a part of the Staff Experience Survey, and this helps us understand the relationship between An employee, in this case, a faculty member's likelihood to recommend, and I'll use the arrow here for those who are online looking here. So it's the relationship between a faculty member's likelihood to recommend the university and their level of satisfaction. And what you see here is the difference between these two groups is what we call the Net Promoter Score. So we have two measures here. One is the raw number of respondents who are likely to recommend and are highly satisfied in blue. You see the numbers like 59, 97, 44, et cetera. And then you have the numbers of people who are the least likely to recommend and the least satisfied faculty members at the university. The percentage of those two is 64% in the blue, highly likely to recommend and are highly satisfied. And then there are 8.3% who are the least satisfied and least likely to recommend. So the difference between those groups, what we say is the Net Promoter Score. The staff group also has, staff respondents also had a similar score. And we'll talk about who won or whose scores were higher or lower, but first faculty only. So here is what we've learned. That the Net Promoter Score, the 64% that are highly likely, really feeling really happy about being here, and the 8.3, the difference between those two groups is 56. What is the scale there? It's similar to a percentage, if you will. So UMB faculty fall in what's called the marginal range at 56. The Net Promoter Score for staff was, I think, 65 or close to 70, which was in the good range. And so in short, we can say staff are more likely to recommend and more highly satisfied than faculty are, but we need to be thinking about, well, why is that? And what are those differences? So this is important for us to know. Good thing is the majority of the faculty, which is 666 people, I won't try to make any sense of that 666 people are highly satisfied and highly recommend, and then 86 not. When we look at this in terms of both color code and numbers, as a leader, as an individual contributor, as a member of our community, which group do you think we need to be with which group do you think we need to be the most concerned? So you have those who are high up here and low down there, and then you have the folks in the middle. Looking for answers online or in person. Which group? Some of you know the answer. If you do know the answer, hold it until next time. Yes, Alexa? The middle. Why the middle? Why do we need to be concerned? Here comes a mic. Alexa's going to share with us why she thinks that. Anyone online? Thoughts about why those folks in this? That's 70 people. That's a sizable number. That could be in some schools, that may be the whole faculty in a particular program or a department. So the middle. So Alexa's right. This is a group with which you need to be concerned because they could go either way. They can become even more satisfied and champions for our research or scholarship and our teaching and all the great things we do with our students and our centers and research. Or they could go the other way. They could become less satisfied and not as likely to recommend. So what are those kinds of programs, interactions, initiatives, guidance, mentorship, advising that can be provided to that group of faculty, right? If we have that small number, that can go either way. So just thinking about that group, you could add that group plus the 8.3%, it kind of adds up. It could be more like, 12, 15, 20% of your people who are either not very satisfied, and it could be somewhere in the middle. Some things to think about. And so far, the data that Christina presented earlier and that I'll present a little bit later will give us some more information about what might make people feel less valued or less satisfied at the university as faculty members. All right, so this graphic here helps us to understand the correlation between the satisfaction as well as the strengths. And so while I'm not the math guru by any means, this chart helps us see, people say, well, some of the top satisfaction scores that Christina talked about are a little different from what's here. What this means is that in the blue, these are not only things that are important to people in terms of their level of satisfaction, but they are influential to them in terms of their staying here, right? So what do people value the most and how closely correlated are they to our opportunities and things that we do here? So influential strengths for this across all schools, and it looks a little different from school to school, but for the most part across all, one of the top areas is 22. Question 22, which is my school practices core values. This is really important to people, that they're treated with respect, that there's integrity, and that we act in those ways. All the areas of equity and justice, all are core values. That's important that people see that. That's really what's helping to keep them here. When people feel that they can contribute to the school's mission, that's an influential strength. So we're really happy about that. Enjoy working with colleagues, co-teaching with them, doing research, having meetings with them, sharing ideas, arguing, building, and so forth. That really matters to people. Like, yes, let's just hash these things out and work it out. Spirit of collaboration. People care about UMB, they care about their schools and what's happening there, and ethical conduct. These are really great strengths. We shouldn't ignore them, and we should say excellent across all schools. If these things are strengths for us, and we know this is what helps people to feel more satisfied here and engaged, we should continue to build on those. Okay. When we look further down, however, the correlation is between, what drives people's satisfaction and what keeps them here. Here are some areas that we also saw in the lower means. People feeling that they can raise concerns without fear. This is a strong influencer, but it's an area that we need to build on, and it's an opportunity for us. Participation in decision-making. We saw that in the first couple of items about having a voice, participating, understanding how decisions are made at the leadership level, that resources in their schools are equitable distributed. That's an opportunity. People feel that it's influential, but it's not something we do very well. Interesting. Integrates core values. So there's some practice of it, but maybe not enough integration in all of the things that we're doing in our hiring, in our teaching, in our relationship with our students, et cetera. Fair performance evaluation. And for faculty, we know that there's the annual faculty review in some schools and promotion and tenure in others, depending on your rank and your level. So these are primary opportunities that people say are influential in their levels of satisfaction. And so for across the schools, and schools have been getting their individual data, what's important is then look at these to see where are we, can we do an assessment, an audit, if you will, as to how resources are distributed across faculty members, depending on their duties and their tenure, et cetera. Participation in decision-making, town halls and surveys and conversations and being in faculty meetings, sharing why things happen the way they do so that people understand that and can participate in that. Are there questions or comments so far, Alex, in the chat? I have not been following them.
We do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Do you want to bring someone in?
Yes, please.
Well, Courtney
didn't know
Jones Carney, let me find her.
Courtney.
She asked a clarifying question.
Yep.
Courtney, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go ahead and turn your mic on.
Hi, folks. Hopefully,
Hello.
hello. I think my question was, it was perfect on this slide.
Yes.
So I see that there's some information on here about folks being engaged and disengaged.
Yeah.
Now it's moving.
Yeah, I got it.
And, okay, perfect. And then also around satisfaction. So I was just asking a clarifying question around what are the measures for satisfaction versus engaged or disengaged? Are these the same thing in this survey, or are they different?
All right, so I have the survey here, so I'll read some of the satisfaction questions for folks who are listening in and to answer your question as well. So some satisfaction questions are, I am a satisfied faculty member at UMB. Leadership at UMB demonstrates fairness in their decisions. My research and scholarship are valued, so your satisfaction with that. I feel like I have a voice. So some of those are satisfaction ones. Engagement ones are in their department or program, for example. Hold on. Things around mentorship, for example, or raising concerns or interactions with colleagues. Those are some of the things that will measure how engaged people are. I mean, that also gets to satisfaction as well. So there is a connection, but there are separate dimensions. So the satisfaction ones are, I'm satisfied with, I feel like a valued member, my research is treated and supported, and one is my research is valued. And then effectiveness or engagement has to do with raising concerns, relationship with colleagues, relationship with leaders, and so on.
Okay, thank you. I find that helpful. I was just noting that you can be dissatisfied and engaged all at the same time. So I was just wondering if these things were getting coupled together, or if they were separate things.
Yeah. No, good point. Here it's a spectrum from likely to, because I think that some of the people you're describing might be You said dissatisfied, which should be here, but also engaged. And I think it's seen as somewhat connected. Engagement and satisfaction are connected. But we can look at the specific questions at the end of the survey, and we'll post this as well for us to, I know it's a 45-minute quick conversation for you to review and then ask some more reflective questions, and we can add that to the Q&A that we've started developing.
I think we have one more question.
Sure.
Quick one, if you can take it. And she's already unmuted her mic. Renee
Okay.
Fonkees, go
Hi.
ahead and ask your question. Renee, go ahead.
Oh, I think I was just referring to a prior slide where you were providing some data for each of our schools and wanting, yeah, a little bit of clarification on that. I think it may have been one prior.
About adequate staffing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the adequate staffing.
Oh, as in one of the lower scores?
Right. Did you have breakdown for the schools regarding that?
Yes, we did. In 5 minutes, somebody can look it up for you. We've been
Okay.
making those presentations to the schools. Was there a specific school that you wanted to learn something about?
I'm from the School of Nursing.
From nursing. Okay, so we can look that up, and while we're here, someone can help us answer that specific question. What this is here is that if across all schools, a particular dimension is in the marginal or low area, more than likely for your school, it was the same, but we'll find out
Okay.
that specific answer in the next 5 to 10 minutes while
Okay.
I'm moving on.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so now we will go to, great questions. We will move to the demographic data to understand how different demographic groups, as I said, we have gender, race, ethnicity, information, disability, and sexual orientation for the entire university across some schools, because some populations were too small in terms of the respondents. We don't have that information. And we have some intersectional data here as well. So for our overview of the university, if you look top left, you'll see how many persons responded in each of the groups. So those with different gender identities, so anything that was not man, woman, or not stated would be here, because we had 8 or so categories and 1 or 2 in each. Those were grouped as one category, so we could at least provide some information there. 354 who identified as man, 487 who identified as women, and then there's a rather large group, almost as many as those who identified as men, 357 not stated. So not quite sure which gender group that is. And so in terms of actionable items, we would have to look at the general data or the data for the first 3 columns to learn more. But here's where we are. Women respondents generally, if you looked at even as a heat map, not expecting that you'll see all these numbers and means, but if you look at all the items, those who identify as women, overall in all the satisfaction items scored lower than all other groups. This was actually also the same finding for staff, and some examples are taking concerns, I feel like the concerns that I raised are taken into account, that there's fair decision-making, my research and scholarship are valued, my research and scholarship is supported. Equitable resources, equitable service work, raising concerns without fear, that there's equitable mentorship. Those who identify as women have lower scores in the marginal range or low. Do we have an answer for the nursing one? Okay, so to scoot back to the answer from before, the nursing score is also in the marginal range for the adequate staffing at 3.11. Hope that answers that question. So if you see something overall for the university in pink or red, as I mentioned before, it's most likely that each school has had that in the marginal range, but it's 3.11 for School of Nursing. And we have made that presentation to the school as well. All right, so overall UMB data, back to that. Those who identified as women, for the most part, had a lower score. What's positive here is that those who identify as women, those who identify as men, different gender identity are not stated. For the most part, people are either satisfied with the diversity programs, feel that all gender identities, sexual orientation, and cultures are treated fairly, and they see that this score across all the gender groups, that their school is committed to EDI, right? And that shows up in programs, initiatives, and so forth. That's in the 4.4+ range, which is really positive. And so excellent leadership in the school, and of course, having our office coordinate and support all of you helps quite a bit as well. Other areas to celebrate: enjoy working with colleagues. All gender groups, are in the 4+ range. So it's either good or excellent. It helps, right? You come to work, the people you work with are ethical, respectful, experts, wonderful people as people in terms of character. So that's a positive there. But certainly we see the highlight here, which means, again, actionable items, which means whether resource groups or opportunities, or looking at how course loads and workloads and service loads are distributed, that we think about that in terms of gender as well, to consider. And the research does show that those who identify as women or women faculty tend to take on more student advising loads, take on the kinds of courses that sometimes they may not get credit for. Their research or scholarship may not be valued in the same ways, because sometimes it's based on identity-based scholarship. Now, these items on the right are newer to some of us who haven't seen this instrument before. And the core questions that we've been looking at, 2 to 57, look at the general things around resources, academic welfare, et cetera. But then there's specific communication or relationship type items, such as made demeaning or derogatory remarks about you, made jokes at your expense, kept you out of the loop of information, treated you differently because of your gender identity, treated you differently because of your racial identity or sexual orientation, made you feel the need to minimize aspects of your identity, for example, language or dress to fit in. So these are specific things that if we see this, and I think there's one that said, interrupted or spoke over you or something like that. These are things that if we look at that, we can say, oh, this is something people are reporting happens a lot. Let's take a note about communication dynamics and how this might make people feel. The good news overall at the university is these are not the means as in, 0 through 5, but this measures the number of times this has happened to an individual in a year. I always say, well, making a joke about someone once, is too many, but we make mistakes and we can correct that. On average, what we see is the scores are between 1 to 2 times, right? And so very low numbers, that's in the blue, which is good. We really don't want more than, say, 1 or 2 occurrences. However, we do see in a few areas, pink or marginal, which is paid little attention to your statement or showed little interest in your opinion. Not stated, again, we don't know in the not stated which gender groups are here, so it's hard to make a distinction, but kept you out of the loop of information that was important. Women faculty in 2023 report that occurrence is actually greater than than those who identify as man or a different identity. So something to pay attention to in various units. Okay, racial information. So the groups that were a part of the demographic groups here, and you'll see the breakouts: Asian American 144, the Black respondents 76, those who were Latinx respondents 24, and so forth. You see it all the way down. The largest group, those identified as white at 546, Southwest Asian, Middle Eastern, North African at 12, multiracial 40, Latinx 24, and so forth, and not stated 368. So again, we don't know which group that is specifically. So when we look across those who identify as Southwest Asian, Middle Eastern, North African, that's 12 respondents. Their responses show just less satisfaction in areas related to department effectiveness, values and culture, and so forth. So something to think about here about how that group is perceiving culture at the university. Generally speaking, in terms of faculty, Asian, Black, Latina, and multi-ethnic respondents scored higher in most of the satisfaction items. That's Asian, Black, Latina, multiracial is here, mostly blue. There are some areas in red, and this actually shared across all ethnic racial groups, that the perception that there's not equitable mentorship or equitable teaching loads. Again, an actionable item that we can think about, and by school, we'll see where this pans out, and you can make the specific arrangements and changes. And Black, Asian, multiracial respondents demonstrating the lowest frequencies of negative behaviors. So in other words, more positive in that sense. Now, I'll make this observation that in talking with employees, faculty, and staff, some of this is flipped in the staff survey. So those who identify as Black, Latino, multiracial have lower levels of satisfaction, and they've shared that they see more programming, more initiatives for faculty in those groups in the faculty in faculty areas, right? So this level of higher satisfaction for the, you know, with the programs or the mentorship and so forth in some of these other groups makes sense because there are networks and initiatives focused on those populations, and there's still work for us to do in some of these areas. Then when you look at the behaviors over here, as you see, mostly positive in terms of very low frequency of some of these things happening across the board. Again, by school, we'll see variations. But those are the 12 respondents is where you have the lowest areas of satisfaction or highest occurrences of isolated or excluded from important opportunities, made you feel that you have to work harder than others to be perceived as a legitimate scholar, and kept you out of the loop of information. Southwest Asian, Middle Eastern, and North African or colleagues who are respondents in that area have higher levels of occurrences of those aspects. Those who identify as white and Latine are reporting, as well as those in the not stated group. So there seems to be a communication inclusion component here across 3 or 4 ethnic racial groups, feeling that they've been kept out or being kept out of the loop of information that was important. So this is a flag for, you know, most of us, it's across all schools that this is happening. So being sure that people have the information that they need to ensure their success, which means their colleagues and their students can also be successful if they have students as well. All right, so information and sexual orientation. The 3 groups are LGBTQ plus 59, heterosexual 77, and not stated 356. I'm not quite sure who would be in that group, but it just tells you how things were divided. LGBTQ plus respondents scored lower in satisfaction in all areas except schools, missions, and have resources. So most of the red or marginal areas when looking across, especially the first 2 columns, comes from this group. They also experience more negative behaviors than heterosexual respondents. If you look here, while it is 3 or 4 areas, that's enough areas. Definitely 1 area would be enough for us to pay attention to. And so higher occurrences of condescension, paying little attention to statements, higher occurrences of interruption when they're speaking, or keeping them out of the loop of important information, making them feel harder, that they have to work harder to be perceived as a legitimate scholar. So being conscious of the treatment of LGBT faculty, this is also consistent with the Williams study that was done in 20 to 21, that Black and LGBTQ faculty didn't feel treated as legitimately or as fairly or as respectfully as other colleagues, which is part of why the Faculty of Color Network and some other kinds of networks were created to address those issues. But here we are continuing to think about how we include and respect and elevate the work of, as well as the character of our LGBT colleagues. And I think there is one other for disability, yes. So here, 74 persons are respondents report that they have a disability and wanted to share their experiences, and 1,000 plus report not having a disability. And so we see here highlighted in red, our colleagues with disabilities have lower levels of satisfaction in almost all items of the core questions, from satisfaction to Department of Values and Culture. In the department effectiveness area, that almost every single item there, meaning where they are located in their programs or units, or some schools don't have departments, but program or area, there is inadequate staffing. There's not, they don't feel like their area supports training for them, that there's equitable service work, equitable mentorship, performance review is not very useful. There's not a clear advancement decision-making process, fair or clear, which is 2 different measures. Integration of core values, they're not seeing that in their area. So this is something of concern. I will share, and I shared in other meetings before, that for our Forbes designation, where we're congratulated in 22 and 23 for being best employers for diversity, for this year, we still got that designation, and it's primarily because of our leadership representation and commitment to EDI, office structure, and programs and initiatives targeting underrepresented groups. However, our work related to advancing and promoting work for our colleagues who are disabled, and also attending to generational differences are areas that need attention and diversity. So this makes perfect sense. We saw some similar things with staff, and we know the complications there are with declaring that one has a disability while in an academic role or while being an employee at the university. This is something that with human resources and with faculty affairs, we can continue to work on together. Also, for the specific behaviors that we just talked about, individuals with disabilities report more negative behaviors, right? At higher frequency, such as people paying little attention to their statements or showing little interest in their opinion, interruptions speaking over them, and keeping people out of the loop. They have higher occurrences. For those who say they have disabilities, that's their experience. However, you'll note that both groups talk about being kept out of information that's important to them. So there is a communication inclusion challenge, which is what I mentioned before with other groups as well. I think we are close to the end now. And so what we did here with this, please do not be excited or confused by all these numbers. But what we did here is to try to think about ways that we can intersectionally understand the data. For example, so under race ethnicity, how can we think about combinations of gender identities and Asian? And what's important here is we pulled out the major findings on the left to help us to think through when we look at gender and race being intersected. So again, we had mentioned before, I think there were 12 respondents here. Important to note, but I just wanted to point it out anyway. Southwest Asian, Middle Eastern, North African women scored low in all dimensions except EDI. So this group, when we look at both the race ethnicity component and gender, which is women, they had the lowest scores in general areas of satisfaction, except in areas around DEI, fair treatment, satisfaction with programs, having diverse faculty, et cetera. Satisfaction with UMB and department effectiveness had a low score for those primarily who identified as white, Swanix and MENA, and not stated. So there were quite a few groups, and this is consistent across the general data. Satisfaction with UMB, meaning relationships with leadership and transparent decision-making, needed work overall. We know this, and we're going to be thinking about that. Okay. Under Asian, here another finding, and different gender identity, Black and multiracial man. So that's some here as well as here. They report having higher levels of satisfaction in most areas other than adequate staffing and work-life balance. So those who identify as Asian or Black or multiracial man. Some similar findings with the behaviors, Swana and Mena scored low. Women scored low in 4 of the interpersonal behaviors in terms of satisfaction, right? Or the occurrences with being kept out of the loop and paid little attention. We saw some of that in some of the earlier data. All right, so overall, to wrap up for today, really happy with a 37% response rate. With the staff, I think it was just about the same. And we are hoping year over year, as we continue to make changes, institute new programs, add funding and staff to certain areas, that this will actually grow. In my previous institution, an instrument like this was administered over 10 plus years, and we as a standard had 60+% response rate. So we're going to be aiming for that. Our initial aim was 20%. So when we got past 30 and we got to 37, we were even more excited. So very excited about having 1,000+ of our colleagues fill this out. Good news for us, 72% satisfied or extremely satisfied as faculty. We saw some similar things with staff. DEI across all dimensions, all schools, all areas scored higher in the good range. I think core values, there was a shout out for that. All UMB areas scored good or excellent for my school practices UMB core values. This is important. We're seeing more of this. Top satisfaction scores, core values, student respect, spirit of cooperation, ethical conduct, sexual orientations treated fairly, and mentoring guidance. So that's encouraging for new faculty who want to join here or faculty who want to stay here. That's really good. And then the net promoter score in the marginal range, certainly an area of opportunity, as in drumming up more support, passion, support for our faculty. And then some of the demographic data, I just reviewed this. Female respondents overall scoring lower than male faculty respondents in most areas, except a few like schools' mission and core values. Asian, Black, Latino, multi-ethnic respondents scoring higher in most satisfaction items than white respondents. And as I said, I think this is because of programs that have been instituted in schools for these groups. However, LGBT faculty scoring lower in satisfaction, and also those who identify as having a disability, having higher occurrences of negative behaviors. Okay, we are almost at 4. Happy to take any questions or comments. Alex.
Well, we have a number of questions in the chat about the school-specific data, so I want to bring in
Oh.
Yvette Conyers
Yep.
to give voice to some of that. Yvette, go ahead, open your mic and ask about that.
Hi, good
Hi, Yvette.
afternoon. Hi, I was just wondering, how do we get access to the data or who has it?
Great question. So now that we've had this presentation to the whole campus, I don't know how many people are online right now, 50+ registered. We're going to post this on the faculty affairs website, which is where the information about the survey administration was advertised. So we'll post this overall information there. We are working through all the schools. I think we only have 1 or 2 schools left to present the faculty experience survey data. And we ask you to work with your deans on how you want to post that for your schools. But this will be on the faculty affairs website. I'm hoping in the next week or 2 to have that up. Everything that's here, including these questions and the demographic data, will also be there. Okay.
Does anyone here in the room have a question? Emily's right there with the microphone, so if you have something. Okay,
There's something in the chat, Alex.
nothing. Oh, wait.
From
we
Miranda?
have Miranda. Want to bring her in?
Or yeah, we just read what's there. I saw something in.
Well, Miranda, go ahead, open your mic and ask your question.
Yeah, I just had a question about looking at some of the other items, if there were any other items that could be considered balancing measures, just because some may consider some of the responses subjective in nature. So I mean, just kind of looking at the overall picture of some of those responses.
When you say a balancing measure, what do you mean?
I just kind of wonder, when you were kind of looking, is people's definition and perception of how they consider a therapeutic work environment. I just kind of, different places you come from, my version of what I consider an integrative therapeutic work environment that fits needs may not be what's considered the same. And so that's why I'm just kind of thinking in that overall picture.
Right.
And years of experience of teaching, my needs may be different in terms of me coming in more self-sufficient as opposed to someone who comes in and feeling that they're maybe kind of not feeling need because they're not quite sure that where there needs to be addressed. And that may not be how do I put it? Maybe like a main goal of the school. When they're in those early phases. So that's why I was just kind of thinking of, not to nullify any of, I think people's concerns are completely legitimate, but just wondering, the best way to try and meet them as we're looking through the data.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Great question. So this is an experience survey. So we're finding out all kinds of things around their perceptions or needs or requirements regarding mentorship, teaching, research, respect, relationship, interaction, and so forth. We've talked with a number of our leaders and among ourselves, and some of the things that we're learning is this is one way that we learn how people experience the university and what they need. And then there are our faculty meetings, and there are the one-on-ones, and then there are the cohort meetings and so forth. Orientation of junior and new faculty, like what are the kinds of things that we're hearing from them that they need? Great points and questions about mentorship. Some might need more than others. And so, we really look to our department chairs, our faculty colleagues, our senior colleagues, our provost's office, my office, and others to think about ways to learn from people. And we have comments from the surveys as well. If we're able to post them without any identifying information, we will, to learn about what people's needs are. As a faculty member, I remember having a faculty mentor who's now a provost. And I really loved working with her and asking her questions on my road to tenure. I was like, how do I do this? And we had a mid-tenure review. How do I prepare that? This was in the days of binders and no like online anything, and putting in all the course evaluations and I needed some guidance with that. And I had other colleagues who were just like moving all the way through, no problem, And so how do you know what those needs are? Talking to my chair, talking to my dean. And then when I became a department chair, I began doing those kinds of things, having cohort meetings with junior, mid-level, and senior faculty to learn about that. So there are these questions, there are the comments, there cohort related meetings to learn that. And then we kind of figure out what works best for the department. And we're learning that ethical conduct, respectful interactions are some important things. And if we have those, we build on that to get that kind of information to make our experiences better for faculty. Okay, well, thank you all very much. We will post this on the website. I believe this has been recorded. And so this will also be posted for those who want to hear more of the explanations and the questions. And onward and upward with improving faculty life at UNB. Thank you, everyone.